If you look at Lindsay Clancy's reported medication timeline, it is easy to have an immediate reaction that it is a lot of psychiatric medication changes in a relatively short period of time. But as psychiatric providers, we have to go deeper than simply counting the number of prescriptions, because the most important question is not how many medications were being prescribed. The more important questions, there are a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. Was she actually taking these medications? Why was each medication being prescribed? What was discontinued on the med list? What was being replaced? Were there overlapping medications? How consistently were the medications being taken? And how did her symptoms change after each medication adjustment? And perhaps most importantly, was anyone seeing the entire clinical picture? Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Georgette, a psychiatric provider and a psychiatric educator. This is part 4 of my Lindsay Clancy's educational series. The Lindsay Clancy's trial is currently ongoing as of August of 2026, and additional testimony may change our understanding of her treatment. This discussion is strictly for education and awareness. I am not trying to independently diagnose Lindsay Clancy, determine whether her treatment met the standard of care, establish professional negligence, or determine criminal responsibility. Now, let's start with the big picture. The reported medication history stretches from September 2022 through January 2023. According to court records and public reported information, Lindsay was reportedly prescribed 13 different medications and received more than 30 prescriptions during approximately 4 months. The medication reportedly included sertraline, also known as Zoloft, lorazepam or Ativan, Benadryl, buspirone, trazodone, fluoxetine, zolpidem, commonly called Ambien, mirtazapine, also known as Remeron, clonazepam, quetiapine, also known as Seroquel, diazepam, also known as Valium, lamotrigine or Lamictal, and later amitriptyline. These medications represent several different medication classes and were reportedly prescribed across different clinicians and treatment settings. But before we analyze any of those medications, there is one very important distinction psychiatric providers need to make. Prescription does not mean taking. A prescription history is not the same thing as an active medication list. And an active medication list is not necessarily the same thing as what the patient is actually taking. Prescribed does not automatically mean taking. Filled does not automatically mean taken. And seeing 13 medications across 4 months does not mean someone was taking all 13 medications simultaneously. Some medications may have been stopped. One may have replaced another. Some may have been PRN, as taken as needed. There may have been cross-tapering going on. A medication may have been prescribed but never started by the patient. And adherence may have been inconsistent. So before calling something polypharmacy, we need to reconstruct the actual medication exposure. So what was active? What has been discontinued? What is the PRN here? What overlap? And what was the patient actually taking? That is why medication reconciliation matters so much. Now, let's take a close look at the medication timeline. Once we understand that distinction, the timeline becomes much more clinically useful. So in September of 2022, sertraline appears. You can take a look at it. By October of 2022, we have lorazepam, Benadryl, buspirone appear in the history. During November of 2022, the timeline includes trazodone, fluoxetine, Ambien, mirtazapine, clonazepam, then Seroquel. During December of 2022, there were several reported changes involving diazepam, Seroquel, along with the addition of Lamictal. And during January of 2023, the reported timeline included trazodone, lorazepam, diazepam, and finally amitriptyline. Again, this does not establish that all of these medications were being taken together. But clinically, when I see this degree of medication movement, I start asking a different question. I'm not just going to ask, what medication should we try next? But when I look at this, what I'm thinking, what is happening to the trajectory of this illness? Why are medication changing? Why are there so many med changes? Is the patient not responding to these meds? Are there adverse effects? Are the symptoms themselves changing? Are we treating anxiety? Are we trying to treat depression here? Insomnia? What are we treating? Are we treating intrusive thoughts, a bipolar spectrum presentation, psychotic symptoms, or medication-related symptoms, or some combination of this? And after every significant medication change, there is one question I especially want to be answered. What happens next? Medication changes are clinical data. Every medication trial gives us information. If symptoms improve, that is data. If nothing changes, that is data. If symptoms worsen, that is important information. If the patient becomes increasingly restless, activated, confused, sedated, impulsive, unable to sleep, that is information too. The response should not automatically be to add another psychotropic medications. Sometimes the appropriate response is, I need to reassess my clinical formulation. That does not mean that the previous diagnosis was necessarily wrong, and it does not mean a previous clinician was negligent. Psychiatric presentations, they evolve, they change. New information emerges, symptoms to change. Family members may provide additional history, and treatment response itself can provide additional diagnostic information. Our assessment needs to evolve with the patient's presentation. Now, look at the antidepressants. The medication history, it includes several antidepressant properties. She was prescribed sertraline, fluoxetine, mirtazapine, trazodone, and later amitriptyline. Some of these medications may also be used as certain doses for symptoms such as insomnia. And I want to be very clear here. The presence of antidepressants does not establish inappropriate treatment. Antidepressants may be appropriate treatments for depression and anxiety during the postpartum period. It is first line. It is a lot of evidence supports that, but when clinical presentation is changing, providers should continually reassess for symptoms suggesting something beyond uncomplicated anxiety or unipolar depression. For example, new or worsening agitation, marked irritability, racing thoughts, elevated energy, mixed depressive and manic symptoms, psychotic symptoms, unusual beliefs, significant behavioral changes, or a decreased need for sleep. In susceptible patients with bipolar disorder, antidepressants can cause mania, it can induce mania, but that is just a general clinical principle. It does not establish that antidepressants cause Lindsay Clancy's deterioration, and it does not establish that antidepressant caused the death of her the death of her children. Those are very different claims. And then there is also sleep. Another pattern that stands out is how many medications on this timeline potentially intersect with sleep. On the timeline, we see trazodone, we see Ambien, mirtazapine, quetiapine, Benadryl, benzos, and later amitriptyline. That should make psychiatric providers ask, what was driving the sleep disturbance? Because insomnia is a symptom, it is not itself a diagnosis. And there is an important distinction between insomnia and decreased need for sleep. A patient experiencing severe anxiety or depression may desperately want to sleep. They might have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. They might feel completely exhausted, but they cannot sleep. But now, a patient experiencing mania or hypomania might sleep very little and still report having energy or feeling that elevated energy. So there is still energy despite not sleeping. Those are different clinical presentation. Significant sleep deprivation itself can also worsen cognition, emotional regulation, psychiatric symptoms. So if severe insomnia continues despite repeated interventions, the question should not automatically to prescribe another medication. Sometimes the more important question is, why is this patient still not sleeping? So here's the main takeaway from part 4. Do not just count the medications that the prescriptions, reconstruct the clinical story. The prescription timeline gives us important questions, but it doesn't automatically give us answers about causation, adherence, diagnosis, or appropriateness of the treatment. So in part 5, we are going to go deeper. We are going to look at specifically at the medications that appear repeatedly in the timeline, like zolpidem, for example, benzodiazepines. You notice that in the timeline, quetiapine, lamotrigine. We see buspirone, Benadryl, and then we are also going to look closely at what was happening in January 2023, immediately before the events of January 2023, because this is where another major lesson becomes important. Timing does not automatically mean causation, and this is also where care coordination becomes part of the clinical discussion. So see you in part 5. I'm going to upload the part 5 right after this.